The sun was a merciless furnace, scorching the cracked earth of the Nevada desert, where a small, trembling figure knelt beside a lifeless body. Dust swirled around them, carried by a wind that howled like a grieving spirit. The girl, no older than 7, clutched her mother's cold hand, her tiny fingers searching for a pulse that would never come. Her tear-streaked face was pale, her brown eyes wide with a terror that no child should know. The wagon train had moved on hours ago, leaving them behind, her mother too weak to continue, her daughter too small to be noticed. The world was vast and empty, and she was alone, until the shadow fell over her. A man on a horse, his silhouette stark against the blazing sky, watched in silence. His face was weathered, his eyes hidden beneath the brim of a dusty hat. He didn't speak, didn't rush to her side with comforting words. Instead, he dismounted slowly, his boots crunching against the dry ground, and knelt beside the girl. She flinched, clutching her mother's hand tighter, but he didn't touch her. He looked at the woman's body, then at the girl, and something unspoken passed through his gaze, grief, perhaps, or recognition of a pain he knew too well. Without a word, he lifted the girl onto his horse, wrapped her mother's shawl around her trembling shoulders, and rode toward the horizon. His name was Elias, though the girl wouldn't learn it for days. He was a cowboy, a drifter who spoke little and trusted less. His life was one of solitude, moving cattle across endless plains, sleeping under stars that never answered his questions. He'd seen death before, too much of it, and had hardened himself against the world's cruelties. But something about the girl, whom he later learned was named Clara, cracked the walls he'd built. She was small, fragile, with a stubborn spark in her eyes that refused to be snuffed out, even by loss. Elias didn't know how to care for a child, but he couldn't leave her to die. Their first days together were quiet, marked by the rhythm of hooves and the creak of leather. Clara barely spoke, her voice trapped behind a wall of grief. She clung to the shawl, her only tether to her mother, and stared at the ground as they traveled. Elias, unsure of what to say, offered her what he had, a canteen of water, a piece of hardtack, a blanket when the nights turned cold. He didn't push her to talk, and she didn't ask him to. But at night, when she thought he was asleep, he heard her soft sobs, and his heart, long unused to tenderness, ached in a way he couldn't name. They arrived at a small settlement called Red Hollow, a cluster of weathered buildings clinging to the edge of nowhere. Elias had planned to leave Clara with someone better suited, a family, perhaps, or the preacher's wife. But the townsfolk were wary, their faces etched with suspicion. A lone man with a strange child? Whispers of trouble followed them. The preacher's wife, a stern woman named Mrs. Hargrove, agreed to take Clara, but her cold demeanor made the girl shrink back, clutching Elias's sleeve. For reasons he couldn't fully explain, Elias refused to leave her. He rented a small cabin on the edge of town, telling himself it was temporary, just until he found a better solution. Life in the cabin was simple but strained. Clara was haunted by nightmares, waking with screams that pierced the quiet night. Elias, unaccustomed to comforting anyone, would sit by her side, his large hand resting awkwardly on her shoulder until she fell back asleep. He taught her practical things, how to tend a fire, how to mend a torn shirt, hoping to give her skills to survive. But Clara's questions were harder to answer. "Why did Mama die?" she asked one evening, her voice small but piercing. Elias froze, his throat tight. "Sometimes the world takes what we love," he said finally, his voice rough. "Ain't fair, but it's true." She looked at him, her eyes searching for more, but he had no more to give. The townsfolk's suspicion grew, fueled by rumors. Who was this girl? Why was Elias, a man known for keeping to himself, suddenly playing father? A local rancher, Amos Tate, took a particular interest, his greed disguised as concern. Tate owned half the land around Red Hollow and had a reputation for getting what he wanted. He saw Clara as an opportunity, a child to claim as a ward, to gain favor with the town or, worse, to exploit for labor. He confronted Elias one day at the general store, his voice loud enough for all to hear. "A drifter like you ain't fit to raise a girl," he sneered. "Hand her over, and I'll see she's cared for proper." Elias's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, his silence more menacing than words. Clara, hiding behind him, squeezed his hand, and he felt a surge of protectiveness he hadn't known he possessed. The tension came to a head one stormy night when Tate and his men arrived at the cabin, demanding Clara. Elias stood in the doorway, his rifle in hand, his eyes cold as steel. "She stays with me," he said, his voice low but unyielding. Tate laughed, but there was fear in his eyes. The standoff ended when a neighbor, a kind-hearted widow named Sarah who'd taken a liking to Clara, vouched for Elias, warning Tate of the town's growing distrust of his own motives. Defeated, Tate backed off, but not before spitting a promise to watch them closely. Elias and Clara's bond deepened through small moments. One day, she found an old harmonica in his saddlebag and asked him to play. He hesitated, then blew a shaky tune, the notes carrying memories of a life he'd left behind. Clara giggled, the first real laugh he'd heard from her, and something in him softened. He began to tell her stories, not of heroes or grand adventures, but of the land, the stars, the way the wind spoke if you listened. She started to talk more, sharing fragments of her life with her mother, a seamstress who'd dreamed of a better future. Elias listened, and though he didn't say it, he vowed to protect that spark in her, to give her a chance at the life her mother had wanted. The greatest challenge came not from Tate or the town, but from Elias himself. He was haunted by his own past, a wife and son lost to fever years ago, a wound that had driven him to solitude. Caring for Clara stirred those memories, and with them, fear. What if he failed her, too? One night, after Clara fell asleep, he sat by the fire, wrestling with the urge to run. But when she woke from another nightmare, calling his name instead of her mother's, he knew he couldn't leave. He wasn't her father, but he was hers, and she was his. Months turned into a year, and Red Hollow began to change. Sarah and other townsfolk warmed to Elias, seeing the man beneath the silence, a man who'd chosen to stay for a child who needed him. Clara grew stronger, her laughter more frequent, her eyes brighter. She still carried her mother's shawl, but it was no longer a shield against the world, only a reminder of love. Elias, too, found something he hadn't known he'd lost: purpose. He took a steady job at a local ranch, and though he'd never be a man of many words, he spoke enough to make Clara feel safe. One spring morning, as wildflowers bloomed across the desert, Clara tugged Elias's hand and pointed to the horizon. "Can we go see the world someday?" she asked. He looked at her, then at the vast, open land, and nodded. "Someday," he said, a rare smile breaking through. "But for now, we got this." He gestured to the cabin, the town, the life they'd built from ashes. The story of Elias and Clara spread beyond Red Hollow, a quiet tale of two broken souls who found each other in a merciless world. It wasn't a story of grand heroics, but of small, stubborn acts of love, choosing to stay, to listen, to heal. And as the camera pans across the desert, where a man and a girl walk hand in hand, the message is clear: even in the harshest places, hope can grow, if you're willing to hold on.